Colin Cowherd sticking around at Fox Sports, which was expected and now official via Ryan Glasspiegel of Front Office Sports. Cowherd has agreed to an extension with FS1. His deal was set to expire later this year. We looked ahead to that a couple of times, and including in our 2025 preview episode with Ben Koo, we all assumed he would be back. FS1 almost doesn't exist without Colin Cowherd, so I'm sure they are glad to have him. The other interesting aspect of it, though, Ben, is that he is moving to Chicago in the spring as part of this new deal. He said on his podcast, separate from the Herd, that he will broadcast about 85% of his shows from a new studio set in the Big Ten Network offices that are based in Chicago already, meaning he said he'll come back a couple of weeks during the NFL season, I guess, is what the thing is going to be here. Nice coincidence that Fox happens to have a stake in the Big Ten and the Big Ten Network, or I guess I should say in the Big Ten Network, and can make this happen for him in a city he has family ties to. But this feels like, I don't know, for us, a less interesting story than Colin leaving. What did you think when you saw it come through?
It's, I mean, my first thought was the Big Ten offices and what this means for Colin Cowherd, like contributing to coverage of college football, because it feels like he's kind of gotten away from that when that used to be his bread and butter. And I don't know if that was like a result of just being out on the West Coast as long as he was. How long has he been on the West Coast? He's largely always
he's been in LA since he moved to FS1. So 8 years or so, something like that.
Okay. So it did seem like he was getting away from college football a little bit. And I think that, I don't know, I would imagine this signals that he will be more involved in Fox's college football coverage. And I don't know if that means like being on Big Noon Saturday or anything like that.
Would you like him on that show?
I'd be interested in him on that show. It would be definitely a fresh coat of paint for that show, which I think it desperately needs. I think they started off with a bang back in 2019, I think it was, and it's just kind of gotten stale. And I mean, we've talked about this 100 times. It's just turned into an infomercial for the Big Ten. And I think Cowherd's, more national perspective could be a nice addition to that. So that's where my mind went with it. And it will be kind of cool to see like Colin Cowherd just become like a Midwest guy as a Midwest guy myself. So I'm interested in that aspect of it.
I'm sure he'll really blend in. Yeah. He'll be an everyman in a year.
Yeah. He'll be wearing Travis Matthew hats and quarter zips and all the things we do out here. But in terms of like the big picture media landscape, to me, it was either stay at Fox or take on the volume full time, whatever that looks like. And so I guess I never had any delusions of him like coming back to ESPN or anything like that. It would have been interesting to see what he could have done with the volume, taking it like truly on his own and dedicating himself to that full time. But I think you look at FS1 and its programming and the direction it's heading in, it almost seems like a merger is happening where like the volume is about to start taking over some of this FS1 programming. And so I think to me, that's what it kind of signaled, is that like Colin Cowherd, he's already FS1's like signature talent, but like, it wouldn't be surprising to me if like he winds up being their like signature de facto executive, especially considering the mess that they're in right now.
Well, yeah, that is maybe where we can close this conversation. I think, he's always had this weird arrangement. I mean, weird is a bad word for it. He's had an interesting arrangement where he technically is like, he works for iHeartMedia. That seems to be he always references them as his employer. Like he says that. So I think, and I would imagine the audience on radio is, I mean, I don't know. The Herd averages around 150,000 viewers on TV. That's like any kind of month that they put out numbers or anyone writes about it, that's sort of in the ballpark. That's not much, that's like a sixth of what like First Take does, or a seventh. I mean, First Take pushes 1 million sometimes. So it's not a lot. I think the radio and also like the YouTube and podcast stuff, like a lot of his audience is not on TV. So iHeart being a prominent part of the puzzle here is not surprising. that iHeart deal, I think, also sort of expanded to include the volume when that launched. So it's kind of like this triangle, even more so than just iHeart and Fox. There's also the volume piece, like you're saying. So how the the quadrants of the triangle like change in size over time is going to still be, I think, a question, even though he's back at FS1 here. And then there's also like the volume sale possibly. When he raised money for the volume originally, there was the reporting of he wants to sell it. Here's the valuation, this and that. That's sort of quieted down, but also the company has not super. It hasn't made a big deal in a while since it partnered with Shannon Sharp and that side of things. It's just, these are our shows. It's not exactly small, but it's not spending anymore either. So yeah, I'm curious to see kind of how he tackles the next iteration. Do you think you mentioned something on Cowherd once when we were, I think, doing like the who cuts through draft at ESPN, and I think I had brought up Cowherd, maybe it was then. And you were like, well, I don't think he's a major voice anymore. And that kind of caught my attention. He's a name, but I also sort of think you're right that he's like we almost cover him the same way we cover like, I don't know, like Mad Dog or something. It's like, because we should.
Right.
I don't know if his voice matters. I don't know if a 20-year-old knows who that is. Is that crazy to say?
No, I mean, he's kind of in that like quasi legend like territory. It's like Colin Cowherd is a established sports media legend. He's still actively working, but like, how often are we writing up clips from his show? We wrote up, he left his show sick this week in the middle of the show. And that was like the first time like I'd really thought about the Herd in a while, other than the news of him resigning. His show, for whatever reason, and it's well established, like he has like 20 writers on the show, right? And so I think like once that's out there, a lot of people kind of take it as like, okay, this isn't like, this is more performance than it is a sports talk radio show. And so I don't know. His show, like I said, he's gotten away from some of the college football roots that I thought really set him apart when he was at ESPN. And I think what many people would consider his heyday, but to me, it doesn't cut through.
Yeah. I'm the age where I have no real memory of Colin at ESPN. Like I wouldn't have been listening to radio. Like I obviously know he worked at ESPN, but I wouldn't be able to tell you what he was good at, or even, I don't know. FS1 Colin is like, that's who he is to me. And so he's never really been somebody that I like think of as an agenda setter of any kind. He's kind of like doing this thing off to the side that, like you're saying, it sort of feels like the performance and the agitation is the point. But not quite in the confrontational way of Stephen A, but more like a ta-da kind of way. Like I made you think that, but you don't know if I believe it. And it's like, it kind of falls apart at a certain point where I don't need to be guided to an interesting point of view if that's the end of it. Yeah, I'd like to kind of learn something or be entertained, and it's like this middle ground.
And there's, I think, enough clips out there of him just totally contradicting himself on like pretty clear-cut stuff where it's like, okay, clearly there were writers who thought this one day, and then they decided this was a better slant on another day. That like, and once you build up that reputation, you don't become somebody who I think people are interested in hearing. Like, I didn't think of the Luka trade and think, oh, I have to hear what Colin Cowherd has to say about this, even though he's kind of a LA guy. So I think there is like a price to pay for when stuff like that happens on a consistent enough basis.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We mentioned we've been saying FS1 needed to keep Colin Cowherd in order to probably even exist. I mean, I don't know if that's too extreme to say, but they are also now facing down the barrel of another lawsuit from a former talent related to, sexual misconduct allegations from a current executive who has now been placed on leave, reportedly. And, there's this kind of, they also broadcasting the Super Bowl on actual Fox, main ship, but On top of that, what's the future of FS1? What's the future of Fox News, Fox in general? Drew Lerner from Awful Announcing kind of broached that when he was on the show a few weeks back, talking about the first lawsuit. There's a lot still on the table. I guess this is probably a sigh of relief for them. Any final thoughts on looking ahead for Fox, or we don't know?
I mean, I think just to go back to my main point, if you're looking at the future of Fox and what it has going for it, other than NFL rights, I think it would be Big Ten rights, because the Big Ten is so clearly positioned in this new age of college football. It's going to be the Big Ten and the SEC probably forming two super leagues. And so maybe it's giving Fox too much credit for them to even realize like that's probably their way forward here. But to me, like moving Cowherd to Chicago and putting him in the Big Ten offices, that to me does at least signal that like they're aware that as they move forward, it's going to be NFL and it's going to be Big Ten. And it makes sense to pair one of their signature talents with one of those entities. Because right now he's kind of a no man land in no man land.
His hits with Klatt every week are pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't hate him as maybe even more of like a host on a Big Noon Kickoff. Could work. Maybe an analyst. He did the Fox NFL Kickoff, the early show on Sundays for a little while. So not impossible to imagine.